Welcome to the first episode in a new Legendarium series about the French Peasant Rebellion of 1358. In part 1, we will talk about the sorry state of France after the Poitiers disaster and how the French peasants rose in rebellion rather than face further exactions at the hands of the French nobility. In 1356, France suffered a disastrous defeat at the Battle of Poitiers, during which King Jean the Good became a prisoner of the English. This utterly discredited the French nobility, as the peasants blamed the nobles for abandoning King Jean. The Dauphin Charles, the future King Charles V, further angered the peasants by ordering them to work on fortifying the castles of the nobility who oppressed them. And on top of that, the peasants had to pay higher taxes to pay King Jean's ransom, some 2 million gold pieces. And meanwhile, King Jean enjoyed a comfortable captivity in England with his horses, falcons, hunting hounds, and retainers in one of the English royal houses, having a much better time than any of his overtaxed subjects. And what of the French peasants who had to pay King Jean's ransom? The poorest peasants of France had to rent a plow just to work the earth. They slept on straw, had little if any furniture, and had no land to call their own. Rather, they toiled on the lord's estates to grow cash crops that financed his lavish lifestyle. Middling peasants had a one-story house of thatch and plaster filled with furniture and cooking utensils, but since they didn't have much land, they didn't have much else to their name. The most affluent peasants could own 60 or 80 acres of land, enough to pay for their own field hands and even afford fancy dress and silver goodies. Yet even the best-off medieval peasants were treated by the aristocracy with utter contempt. And even worse, by 1358, the French peasants, rich or poor, faced ruination from English armies who came to their country to fight the 100 Years' War, but stayed to make a living as robbers in the French countryside. And because of this, it was the rich peasants who led the poor in rebellion. On May 28, 1358, a group of peasants in the village of Saint Leu, near Compiègne, held an angry meeting in the local cemetery. They blamed the nobility for their misery and decided to do something about it. Those who had staves and knives picked them up, and a band of 100 men stormed the nearest manor house. They smashed open the doors, stole fish from the pond, looted the pantry, tore up the floorboards for firewood, and then set the house ablaze. They focused their rage against property rather than people, and only a few knights perished in this first attack. Yet word of the uprising at St. Leu spread like wildfire. In the past, the uprising would have ended there, with an abusive lord punished. Now, with so much misery across France, and a clear sense of outrage in the air because of the perceived abandonment of King John, thousands of peasants turned out, armed with modified farm tools such as scythes, pitchforks, and burning brushwood. Almost 100,000 peasants took up arms in the Oise River Valley, Picardy, Champagne, and even the Ile-de-France, the personal estate of the captive French king. According to the chroniclers of the time, more than 100 manor houses and castles went up in flames. With no concerted defense, the nobles panicked, fled their country estates, and sought refuge in the walled cities. Meanwhile, the peasants whom they contemptuously called Jacques Bonhomme continued to rampage across the countryside. In time, a leader emerged among the peasants named Guillaume Cale. He was one of the rich peasants from Picardy and an example of how some peasants could achieve real influence despite their humble birth. Guillaume Cale was an accomplished military captain and an eloquent speaker, showing he had probably been a leader in war and peace long before the rebellion. As such, Guillaume Cale organized a ruling council with its own seal, appointed local captains, made swords out of scythes, and even flew banners of the fleur-de-lis, in the belief that King Jean blessed his anti-aristocratic uprising from across the Channel. And in the next episode, we will see if that was really the case. That wraps things up for this episode of the Legendarium. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, press like. If you want to see more, press subscribe. And if you've got anything to say, let me know in the comments section. Thanks again for joining me, and I hope that you have a great rest of the day.